Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am going to be sharing some spring book time recommendations with you. As you know, if you've been here for a little bit, I've been really enjoying, for the past couple of seasons, reading seasonally. So I thought I would give some recommendations to you if you're looking for some springy type books also. These books maybe don't necessarily take place during the spring, but they contained some elements that feel spring-like to me. Those elements are kind of like beautiful nature writing, so kind of like a cottage core feel, as well as them being kind of more light reads. I feel like heavier, darker reads, I don't know, they don't vibe with spring as well for me, and a lot of them have some sort of transformative element or almost like an element of new birth, and all of those feel very spring-like to me, so that's why they belong on this list. We've got everything on this list from middle grade to YA to adult, from fantasy to historical fiction to classics. Got a little bit of everything. I did do a spring recommendations video the very first year that I had a booktube channel, which was 4 years ago now. So I'll link that video at the risk of potentially embarrassing myself, because I would say that my style has probably changed a little bit over time. But that video has a lot of kind of the classic spring recommendations that might be more obvious. So you might be watching this video and be like, why on earth does she not have The Secret Garden on this list? Or, you know, just there are some spring books that are like very obviously spring. And so that video has a lot of those recommendations. So I'll link that if you want to go back and watch it, because that has 12 more recommendations besides the ones that I have in this video. So starting out is Hattie Big Sky. And this is a middle grade, I would say it's actually probably closer to YA, about a young girl who decides she's going to move west and just start her life, and she thinks she's going to a place where her uncle is to start fresh. I think it's her uncle, it's some family member, and then she gets there and finds out he's not there, but he's left his farm to her. And so she then starts trying to live off the land, and this goes over many seasons, so it's definitely not just a springtime book, but you see Hattie turn into someone who's self-sufficient and living off the land, and there's just so much growth that happens there, and it takes place in the prairie, and it's just like a really beautiful setting. It actually has a sequel, but the sequel involves her like moving to the city and does not have the same feel at all as the first book, so I definitely prefer the first one. The next one is a really sweet, fun middle grade called The Adventures of Miss Pettifor, and this is about a woman who owns, I think, 16 cats. My daughter can actually name all of them, or used to be able to, because this was one of our favorite books when she was younger. And each chapter is like kind of on the longer side, and they're more telling like a whole story, so it feels more like a collection of like short stories, although they do build on each other. So she goes on adventures, and these cats are typically part of it, but it also has to do with like the small town that she lives in and the people who are there. And it's very funny and it has a lot of very like tongue-in-cheek grammatical things and things that are repeated, and it's a lot of fun. And if you love cats, you're gonna love this one. I feel like no spring is complete without a Willa Cather book. And I always read Willa Cather in the spring now at this point, as of the last couple of years. So I'm going to recommend to you probably what is her most well-known work, but I read it in the spring last year and it was just perfect, and that's My Antonia. My Antonia tells the story of this young boy and this young girl who are both moving to the Nebraska prairie at the same time. The boy is coming to live with his grandparents after his parents have passed away, and the girl is bohemian, moving with her family, and they're looking for a new life being immigrants in this new land. And the dad pulls the boy aside and asks if he will teach Antonia, his daughter, how to speak English. And that then begins like a lifelong friendship and relationship between the two of them. So we follow them in their childhood, and then in their adolescence, and then in their adulthood, and it comes full circle in such a beautiful way. The next one is definitely not set specifically in the spring, as it spans decades and seasons, and that's Goodbye, Mr. Chips. This is a story about a man who becomes a teacher, and then as a result then becomes like a headmaster of a school, and his time teaching and his life, and he's coming to the end of his life and just reflecting on the impact that he's made of the children around him, of the other teachers around him, his relationship and how he met his wife and their marriage. And so it's a really teeny tiny book, but it's so beautifully done about the impact of a quiet life. Next up is a translated work, and that's Sweet Bean Paste. And if you see the cover, it just looks so springy. It's about this man who starts working for this woman who has like the best sweet bean paste recipe. If you've ever had Japanese desserts, a lot of them are stuffed with this sweet bean paste. And now like my brain is now blanking on like the name of the pancakes that they make. I actually made them after I read this book. And so, yeah, so it's the story of the two of them, and he wants the recipe and wants to be able to open a restaurant, but instead he starts working for her, and it's just their friendship. And it's not like this romantic story, you know, she's an older woman and he's like a younger to middle-aged man, like probably 30s, 40s, like somewhere in that range. And so it's just a really beautiful story of their friendship and just a very quiet book. Next up is a fantasy by Brandon Sanderson, and that's Tress of the Emerald Sea. I think this is classified as adult fantasy, but it feels a bit more on the YA side for me just because it feels lighter and it feels more fun. And I actually did read this during the spring. I think I read it in May when I read it, and I feel like it is like a perfect spring fantasy book. I just absolutely love it. It's just a lot of fun, and it's inspired by The Princess Bride. So Brandon Sanderson actually wrote this for his wife because they love The Princess Bride, and it's kind of like a story of what would have happened when Wesley, you know, gets kidnapped by pirates and all this stuff. What if Buttercup had gone after him instead of just staying at home and mourning him? What if she had tried to go and find him? And that was the inspiration for this story of this young girl who finds this love and he disappears at sea, and she goes to try to find him. The writing style is really witty and really fun because our narrator is someone who is very humorous at times, but also has some good insight at times. And so it's just a really fun one. Next up is a children's classic, and that's The Trumpet of the Swan by E.B. White. I find that this is actually E.B. White's least known work. Most people know and love Charlotte's Web, as they should. And a lot of people know of Stuart Little because there's been so many adaptations and things of that made as well, but no one ever talks about The Trumpet of the Swan. The Trumpet of the Swan follows Lewis, who is a swan who is born without a voice. He's a trumpeter swan and he can't make noise. And so his father finds a way to be able to get him an actual trumpet, and he learns to play it so he can communicate with other swans. But then he also becomes kind of like a sensation around humans because a swan playing a trumpet, that's incredible. It's definitely like very heartwarming, but also humorous at times, and just is a perfect fit for spring, even though again, it follows multiple seasons, but there's lots of like migration from fall to spring. So there are a lot of spring scenes. Next up is a book that opens and closes in spring, but follows an entire year. And that's The Blue Castle by Ella Montgomery. This story is about a girl named Valancy who lives in a really overbearing family, and she's constantly cowed by them and their demands and expectations of her. She goes to the doctor and finds out that she has some sort of disease that will kill her, and she's only expected to have a year to live. So she decides that she's going to live her life the way that she wants to. So we begin with that diagnosis in I think May, and then goes through the year of her life. And it is just absolutely wonderful, as you would expect from Ella Montgomery. And that's just a really transformative story and has really beautiful nature writing for all 4 seasons. But it's wonderful to see Valancy like step into who she actually wants to be. Next is one that's actually not a favorite of mine, but I feel like it's such a perfect spring read, and that's The Enchanted April. The Enchanted April follows 4 women who are all very dissatisfied with their lives for various reasons, and there's 2 of them that they decide, we've had enough of our lives, we're stuck in this rut, so we're going to go to Italy and rent this villa for like, I think they're there for like a month or something like that. But, you know, in order to help the costs, they find 2 other women to come alongside with them who they don't really know at all. And we watch the transformation of these women as they're in a new place, and how, you know, kind of removing themselves from the situations helps them to grow and change and get out of those ruts in their lives. Again, the nature writing's beautiful in this one, and I found myself not very connected to a lot of the characters characters, which I think is why it's not a favorite of mine. But I hear so many people say that this is one of their favorites of all time, and honestly, spring is the best time to read it. I feel like Jane Austen screams spring, so I'm going to recommend Emma. Even though Emma definitely has scenes that take place in the winter, it also then goes into spring. Emma is someone who has been really spoiled and petted kind of growing up because she's the only child of her father, born to him late in life, and so he's just kind of given her everything that she wants. And so she's someone who thinks that she knows best, and so she kind of starts meddling in other people's lives and matchmaking and doing things, and there's definitely some really beautiful growth that happens throughout this book. But out of all Jane Austen's books, I feel like this is the one that feels the most springy to me. If you're into cozy mysteries and you read Beatrix Potter growing up, you have to read The Tale of Hilltop Farm. This is a cozy mystery about Beatrix Potter moving to this farm, and there's like some things going on, and the animals are trying to figure out exactly what's going on. Like, so there are talking animals in it. So if that's a deal breaker for you, maybe you won't enjoy that. But if you love Beatrix Potter, that's all about talking animals. So anyways, these animals are trying to figure out what's going on, and the humans around them have no clue, and they can't figure out what's going on. The animals do figure out what's going on, and they're trying to communicate this to the humans, but Beatrix Potter moves to this town and starts living on this farm, so she definitely plays a key role. So it just feels like really nostalgic and cozy and light and fun. The last that I'm going to recommend to you is actually a book of poetry, and it's Flower Fairies of the Spring. There's one of these books for every single season, and they deal with different flowers or plants that bloom or are living during certain times of the year. And so as a result, it feels very seasonal. I actually used to read these to my daughter every single season, and they're just lovely. The illustrations are so, so beautiful, but you'll have just a flower fairy of like a daffodil or of a flower that you would associate with spring. And so it just feels like really lovely and really seasonal. So that's my list of some spring recommendations for you. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, but I would also love to hear if you have any spring recommendations. I actually did this in my fall recommendations last fall and received some really cool recommendations of books I hadn't heard from you guys before, and then did a reading vlog with some of your recommendations. So I would love to hear your recommendations. If they're books that I haven't read or would like to read, I am totally going to do that again this spring. So that sounds like a lot of fun. So if you have any recommendations of books that are perfect to be read in spring, feel free to leave them in the comments so other people could get other ideas of more books to read in the spring as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.